How's it going? Welcome back to another video. My name's Bruce, and in this video I'm going to show you how I did this living room makeover. This is at my parents' house. They've owned this house for quite a while, but it was built in the 1950s. This room was one of the last ones that needed updating. They've changed and updated a lot of the rest of the house, but it had some old paneling and some different stuff. I used the WAGNER FLEXIO sprayer to paint the walls, the ceiling, a lot of the trim. It made really quick work of a lot of this stuff, but let me show you how I did it. As I mentioned, this room is one of the last ones that needed to be updated in the entire house. You can see that it had some old ambered paneling that had some kind of shellac finish on it. It was very dated and begging for a facelift. It had these faux beams in the ceiling that were for decoration. Instead of taking those out, we figured we would use them as an accent and find a way to update them. Instead of crown molding, there was a piece of the same ambered veneered paneling that made a chamfer between the walls or beams and the ceiling. This had to come down before we could do anything else. There was a good bit of demolition and prep that had to be done before we could get to the painting, so I'll show you some of those steps. There was some old track lighting that had been added in years past. We removed it and patched the holes. The shoe molding was perfectly fine, so we were careful when we removed it so we could put it right back down. As you'll see later in the video, we were also able to reuse a lot of the original crown molding from a different part of the house. These floors are original to the house from the mid-1950s, so it was imperative to lay down some thick paper before going any further. Fun fact, when my parents bought this house in 1986, there was orange shag carpet that was about 2 inches tall in this room. The whole house was covered in either orange or green shag carpet. Yep, this hardwood floor was waiting underneath. We're getting some of this heavy-duty paper laid down, so it's coming along pretty nicely. We've got a couple more strips to do, and then the whole room will be covered. We can start working on walls, ceilings, just all kinds of stuff. Bye-bye, little paper. This next task was tedious. Over 60 years, let's just say there were quite a few nail holes to patch. Since we were painting these walls, I had to patch each one of the nail holes with wood putty and then sand them down flush with the wall. I've seen some people put wood putty in the panel seams, but we decided against that. I actually grew up here in this house, and we use this stove to heat a lot of the house, but the fan in it went out years ago and they've not been using it, so my folks are getting rid of it. It's kind of just taking up room now, and they're trying to do a different thing with this fireplace. So we're going to attempt to lift this steel beast out of here with my brother, and hope that goes well. This stove was really heavy, but we were able to get it out and into my dad's truck without much problem. After that, we spent some time cleaning up the mess that was in the fireplace. This fireplace had a lot of spare mortar that had never been chipped off, so we decided to take care of that now. They will possibly be putting in some kind of a decorative but functional stove, kind of like the old potbelly stoves, in the future, so we were preparing for that as best as possible. Then we just cleaned it up as best we could. They hired somebody to inspect and clean the chimney professionally right after this, and then we used some cleaner and wire brushes to remove as much of the loose soot and grime as possible. Next, I turned my attention to the ceiling. Where we took those little chamfer pieces off from the sides of the beams, they left little ridges in the drywall over the years. I guess they just plastered right up to that point. I sanded them flush with a random orbit sander, checking often to see if the ridge was truly gone. My nephew even got in on the action. There was a section of the floor that we forgot to add paper to, so we did that quickly before moving on. Time for some mud slinging. No, not trash talk. Literally slinging some mud on the ceiling. We were floating where that ridge was earlier, so once painted, it would look perfect. Then we went around with a light, spotting places where nails were bulging through the drywall, and using a large coal chisel to hammer them back in. That way we could add some drywall compound to these spots, sand them flush, and the ceiling would look brand new. When you're adding drywall compound, it's always important to remember to use as little as you can to make it look good. Any extra that you apply just means more sanding in your future. Nobody wants that. There was a spot where a wall heater used to be years ago, so we wanted to patch up that spot before painting. I created a little shim and then secured the paneling back before we added wood putty around the seams. We even got serenaded by my mom on the piano at times. Quite the lovely work conditions, if I say so. We vacuumed off the walls and all of the surfaces to remove any dust. Now, it was time to break out the WAGNER FLEXIO 5000 paint sprayer. I was really surprised to find out that everything I needed was contained in this medium tote, including the turbine, 2 different paint sprayers, the hose, and all of the accessories. I started out doing a few tests with primer on the prepared wall. I wanted to see how this thing sprayed right out of the box and what all I would need to tweak. I knew I probably wanted the widest amount of spray possible to cover the most wall, but the compressor feed was what I wasn't sure about. I ended up turning it up pretty high and I was getting really good consistent results. A few things to note that I picked up pretty quickly. Number 1, move a little slower than you think. I was afraid to put too much paint on in one spot, so I was moving the sprayer really fast at first. When I slowed the pace of my movement down, I started getting even more consistent results. Number 2, when spraying overhead especially, I actually ended up wearing a face shield that could be washed. I didn't learn this until after the first round of spraying. I figured it kept some of the paint out of my respirator and off of my glasses. Then I would just wash the face shield with the sprayer when I was done. I'm usually gray, but not quite that gray. I don't know if you can tell. I've been spraying white paint with this paint sprayer and got it all over me. But got a bunch of the ceiling done. We ended up having to spray some primer on there to cover a couple spots to make sure it wouldn't bleed through. This is an old ceiling, so we just want to make sure no stains are going to bleed through. But sprayer did really well. My arms are tired because we went at it for probably an hour and a half just spraying over our heads, and it worked really well. We sprayed both primer through there full strength and a ceiling paint through there full strength. So I'm liking it so far. Like I mentioned earlier, this paint sprayer is made by WAGNER, the sponsor of this video. This one is the FLEXIO 5000 and it has a turbine base which keeps the weight on the ground, not in your hand. It has 2 different nozzles. The eye spray nozzle is the one I use the most. It's ideal for broad surfaces like walls and ceilings. It also has a detail finish nozzle that is for fine finishing on furniture, cabinets, and other things. You can adjust the width of the spray, the amount of the pressure you get from the turbine, how much paint is fed out when you pull the trigger, and it can spray in both vertical and horizontal configurations. I had not used a big boy sprayer like this one before, and it performed quite well. I'll link to this sprayer in the description below, so definitely check it out. Thanks to WAGNER for supporting my channel. I created a little stain swatch board to make it easier for my parents to pick the stain color they wanted for the new beams they were installing. I grabbed 3 stains we had lying around, wiped each one on a board that was similar to the ones we were going to use for the new beams, and let them choose. If you're wondering about all of the paint colors, stain colors, and any other details I may have not mentioned in this video, you can find all of it in the written article on my website. There's a link for it in the description below. We used some of this pre-taped painter's plastic from 3M and it worked really well. The reason we had to use this is we were painting both the ceiling and the walls. It was a little tricky to get the hang of at first, but after a couple of pieces, we saw just how useful it was. You roll it out like a piece of foil and tear it across the entire thing once you have the length that you need. It's 4 feet wide, and once you stick the tape side down, you can unfold it wherever you need it to go. Another cool thing about it is that it actually kind of clings to your wall or surface once you get it spread out, making it flop around less. How cool is that? Now I'm back to spraying. This time it's the top coat. You can't really tell here, but this is a very light gray color. When it's wet, it kind of just looks white. Stick around to the end of the video to see the finish shots and you'll be able to see the difference. Remember, you still want to do light passes. Never put on so much paint that it starts to run. Next, we moved on to the brick fireplace. I'm not really going to show all about that process in this video, but I will likely be doing a follow-up video about painting this brick. We all headed back outside to stain the boards that would become the new beams. We just wiped it on and then removed any excess after a few minutes. Also, I used the FLEXIO sprayer to spray the trim that we removed in the earlier step I told you about. We wanted to go ahead and pre-finish that so that when we put it back up, all we had to do was a little bit of touch up on the nail holes. Time to make some beams. For these, we used some C-grade 1x8s that we picked up from our local lumber dealer. They have a great price and selection on these. I bought a cordless nailer just for this project and I'm really glad I did. Not having to lug around a compressor and hoses definitely made this project go a lot faster and easier. Here's how the process went. We would put up one side piece, just nailing into the previous beams. Then we would attach the other side the same way. When it came to the flat one that went on the bottom, we would get it flush with one side and nail up into the sideboard. Then we often had to use clamps to pull it all together until the other side was flush. We worked our way down the board, nailing as we went. This method seemed to work really well and we got some nice consistent results. They were testing out the idea of painting this mantle white and just leaving it, but it didn't look quite right with the rest of the changes being made. We decided to modify the existing mantle and build upon it. I'm not going to go into all the details on the mantle in this video. I'll do another video about modifying this mantle to look like the beams. At this point, all of the painting is done. It's time to install some crown molding. This is definitely not my favorite step, but we made it work. Everything came together pretty well. It all kind of came back to me and reminded me of the days when I was a trim carpenter over 17 years ago. Man, that feels like a different lifetime. We installed a new ceiling fan where the old light fixture was. It was a good thing we measured because at first glance, this fan didn't look like it would clear the beams. That would have been horrible. My dad swapped out the switches and outlets off camera and I put on some fresh faceplates. It's amazing what those little things can do to a room. Then we could take up the paper. Before getting final shots, we wanted to get a couple of coats of wax on the wood floors. It's not every day you have all the furniture out of a room. I'm really impressed with this X-board paper. It held up quite well with weeks of walking on it. It did tap out though. I had it down for the count. We are just about wrapped up here. There's a little bit of touch-up left to do where we pulled some tape off here and there, or maybe we taped off a little too aggressively. We're gonna get a coat of wax on this wood floor, and I'll show you in just a sec. The wood floor makes the rest of it look fantastic. We finally pulled the paper up, and it's totally different. It's like looking back to a room now, but really after that, we're gonna pop the shoe molding back on, and this room's gonna be ready to put all the furniture back and call it good. I tacked the shoe molding back on with a few brad nails. Then, off camera, we did some touch-up painting after adding some caulking to the crown molding, and this project was done. What do you think?
I think it's just more than I could ever.
It's a transformed room, isn't it?
Yeah.
The transformation of this room is pretty unbelievable. It's a very large room, but even with making these beams slightly bigger, putting a ceiling fan in that wasn't there previously, it still has a really large open feel. I love the way it turned out. I think the lighter color on the walls probably helps to that. It helps give it a lighter feel. I'd love to know what your favorite part about this build was. Leave me a comment down below. Big thanks to Wagner for supporting my channel. I was really happy to be able to use that sprayer. It made quick work of a lot of the painting that we had to do in here. Be sure to check out all the links below of the products I used and that Wagner sprayer. If you have a big painting project coming up, it might be a good option for you. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you on the next video.